So thank you so much for coming to our second kitchen skills series. So we're going to talk about herbs and spices today, and this is going to be just a basic overview to help you sort of get used to using them in your kitchen at home and in your cooking, right? My name is Vanessa Oliver. I'm one of the dietitians with UK Health and Wellness. I know a lot of you, which is great to see some familiar faces, so welcome. All right, well, let me just give a brief overview here. Why do I want to talk about herbs and spices today? What do you guys think? What do you know already? Anyone? What's that?
Deliciousness.
Deliciousness, okay, yeah, they taste really good. They replace salt, right? And they can replace another thing too. They can also replace sugar, all right? They're going to add flavor to whatever you're cooking. So if you're sort of used to falling back on salt and pepper or some highly salted flavoring agents, all right, then this can be a way to make you a little bit more familiar with the flavors that are available to you through herbs and spices. Maybe have you use a little bit less salt and sugar and just sort of increase your kitchen confidence, right? A lot of times people will get a intact spice rack, right? And it's full of spices, and they're all sort of like mysterious brown colors, and you're not really sure what they are, right? And so you just kind of stare at it and use it as decoration instead of really using it in your kitchen is what it's intended for. And the idea, of course, is just to get you sort of out of that habit. Wanting to buy spices and herbs individually as you need them, and that will also increase the likelihood that you'll use them. Okay? So the other couple things that, a couple of reasons why you might use herbs and spices, some of them actually have antioxidants in there. So by antioxidants, you know, what I mean by that is that they contain compounds that could potentially reverse oxidation in your body. We hear a lot about free radicals and how they can be damaging for health, right? And some certain vitamins like vitamins A and C and E, those are all antioxidants and can help stop those free radicals. Free radicals are associated with a lot of diseases as well as aging. So as far as the potential for antioxidants in herbs, it's all there, all right? It doesn't have to be only vitamins. There's other special chemical compounds that these herbs contain as well. Things like parsley, things like turmeric, things like cinnamon. These may have shown up sort of in your internet headlines recently, okay, as fighters of certain diseases, and so it's important to be able to include these in your meals when you can, all right? Also, they just sort of look pretty, okay? You can really sort of just liven up a plate or a dish with adding a little bit of greenery or adding a little bit of different colored spices. If you have a lot of herbs, does anyone grow an herb garden? Yeah, quite a few of you. All right. If you're faced with just buckets and buckets of basil or mint, you know how mint grows, right? It takes over. They can actually be really pretty additions to a floral bouquet in the house, or just keeping them in vases around the house on their own. And that's actually a really good way to store your fresh herbs, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Any questions so far? All right, good deal. Let's talk about using fresh versus dried herbs. Okay, so obviously fresh herbs are going to be more in season during a particular time of year, spring and summer and fall. After that, you're going to be using probably dried herbs or herbs that you've bought in the store. But if you're looking at a certain recipe and you're sort of curious how I should substitute fresh for dried, it's really going to be 3-to-1 ratio. Okay, so 3 times as much fresh as dried. And that does not work the other way around. If anyone has ever used too much, like dried thyme or dried something, it really does impart almost a bitter quality to your foods. Okay, so just remember that 3-to-1 ratio, fresh to dried. When you are picking out your herbs, if you're going to do fresh herbs, okay, you do want to sort of buy them right before you plan to use them, all right? And if you're cutting them from your garden, you want to go on and cut them right before you use them too, okay? And that will maintain the freshness and integrity of the herb. So you can use something like these really cute little herb scissors, which is going to be one of the prize giveaways today, all right? Of course, you can use regular scissors too. but this would be a good way to cut your herbs from your garden because you don't want to pull, okay? If you're pulling from a plant, you run the risk of pulling up a root, or you can tear the plant in such a way that you would be damaging it for future use, okay? These scissors are also useful in cutting already cut herbs from their stems. Stems of a lot of herbs are edible, but they do have maybe a different texture than you're looking for. So for a lot of leafy herbs like this, you wouldn't necessarily include them in your finished dish. I will say, though, that parsley stems and cilantro stems in particular are really flavorful. So if you wanted to cut those up and add them to a cooked dish, or put them in your juicer, if anyone juices, or adding them to smoothies or to salsa, you're still going to get a lot of flavor. It's just going to be a different texture. Okay, I like to use parsley stems particularly in chicken stock or veggie stock if I'm making that from scratch. So if you are using fresh herbs and you want to save the stems for future use, go on and put them in a Ziploc bag and put them in your freezer. Okay. But when you are picking your dried herbs, okay, or choosing your dried herbs, again, you have a little bit more leeway as far as your storage time, but you really don't want to keep them too long in your cupboard. Okay, does anyone have like things in their cupboard and they don't even know how long they've been in there? Yeah. Okay, so that happens all the time, right? Especially if you have that giant spice rack full of things, you never know. So for leafy dried herbs, all right, so like your basil, your thyme, your oregano, that kind of thing, keep those for about 3 months, all right? If you're really unsure, then you can smell it, and if it doesn't smell like what it's supposed to smell like, then it's not going to taste like it either, okay? Because all of those essential oils that give it the flavor have gone. They've gone into the atmosphere. You're just pretty much sprinkling sawdust on your food at that point, okay? With powders and spices, then you can keep those 6 months, okay? They may last a little bit longer. Some of them will last up to 12 months, depending on how fresh they were when you bought them. So try to shop at a store that has higher turnover, all right? If you can, a good sort of rule of thumb is to buy them in bulk, because then you can buy just what you need, all right? So that's one way to sort of get around this. Or shop at a store that specializes in herbs and spices. Here in Lexington, you can buy spices in bulk at the co-op. If anyone shops there, you can get them either in small amounts or you can get them in large bags. If anyone walked in and saw us measuring out of large bags, you can buy those there too. They're 16-ounce bags if you do a whole lot of cooking, okay? Then, of course, there's online sources as well. You can buy anything online, okay? And so if you want to talk to me afterwards, I'll give you some good sources if you're interested in that. Storing your fresh herbs, I mentioned that you can make little bouquets, right? And that's a great way to store. You can store them just around the house in mason jars or vases, or I had water bottles on my desk up until this class today because I was storing my fresh herbs that way, okay? If you want to keep them out, that's fine. If you're more comfortable keeping them in the refrigerator or you don't want them all around the house, you can still store them upright in a glass jar with a little bit of water. You want to put a plastic bag over the whole structure, though, because refrigerators have a tendency to dry things out, okay? Before you put the plastic bag on top of that jar, kind of cut it a few times with a pair of scissors or a knife for some ventilation, all right? So you want a little bit of air, but not too much. And again, this is for your fresh herbs. If you're uncomfortable having a jar or something full of water in the fridge, maybe you've got kids reaching in and out and that could result in disaster, okay? Then you can go on and use a Ziploc bag and just lie those herbs in there flat. Put a paper towel in there to absorb excess moisture, and then they'll keep in the refrigerator for a couple of days that way as well, okay? If you're looking for longer term storage for fresh herbs, maybe you have a bunch that grew in the garden, okay, there's a couple of different methods that you could use. Does anyone have a favorite method that they use for storing fresh herbs?
Freeze it.
Yeah, you can freeze it, right? You can freeze them intact, okay? You lose a little bit of the integrity of the leaf, and by integrity it might get a little mushy, that's what I mean, or it might get a little brown. But for the most part, the flavor will be there. If you would rather not store it whole in the freezer, then you can actually puree them with a little bit of water or oil, depending on what your choices are, okay? And pour that mixture in an ice cube tray, all right? Once that is frozen solid, and it'll take maybe like overnight, okay, 12 hours, you can pop those little flavor cubes into a Ziploc bag, label the bag so you know what it is and it's not just some random green blob in your freezer, right? And then you have 2 tablespoon servings full of fresh herbs that you can add to tomato sauce, stews, marinades, soups, that kind of thing. All right, so that will work for pretty much any fresh, green, leafy herb. You can also dry them yourself. If you have a food dehydrator, of course, that's a really easy and somewhat fast way to do that. Or you can simply make herb bundles and hang them out of direct light, but in a dry part of your home. Okay, so I'll tell you, I'm that person with the herb bundles hanging around my kitchen. It is kind of pretty if you're into that kind of thing. Okay, so those are good ways to preserve. All right, so oil or water, pureed and in the ice cube tray, or dry. Yeah, Annette.
What's the best herbs to put in those bundles? What do you put when you're hanging?
Okay, that's a good idea. Great question. Usually I will dry the hardier herbs, okay? And this is sort of a loose definition, but the hardier herbs are going to be things like rosemary, sage, and thyme, okay? Other things like marjoram or oregano are sort of in between, but things that have a woodier stem are going to be just sort of, they won't fall apart as easily when you're hanging them up, okay? So that structure will really sort of aid in keeping it intact during the drying process. Any other questions? All right, I'm waving this around, it smells really good. When you want to add your herbs, I get that question a lot, right? So if you're cooking a dish and there are herbs in the ingredient list, okay, when do you think you should put them in the pot? On the end, yeah. Does anyone have a different answer? Okay. It's sort of a trick question, right? You should definitely put them in the end for a final burst of flavor, but it's also important to layer your flavors while you're cooking. So you might, if you're using powdered spices or ground spices, put in a little bit in the oil if you're sauteing onion and garlic, and that heat and that oil will help those essential oils that give the herbs and spices flavor, will help those oils bloom, okay? And so that will create a layer of flavor in the beginning of cooking your dish. And then at the end of your dish, you can add even a little bit more of that ground or dried, or that's when you would certainly add your fresh herbs, okay? So for example, if you're making a tomato sauce, you're sauteing onions and garlic to put in there, maybe you add some dried basil or dried oregano in with that oil and onion, and then once you've added the tomatoes and it's simmered, that's when you would snip in some fresh basil or some fresh parsley. Okay? Some popular herb and food combinations, I'll let you refer to your handout there, but I'm just going to talk about a few of them as I cut some up. Okay, so the most popular herb, I think the one that everyone loves, do y'all know what this one is? Right, yeah. So this is fresh basil, mixed in with some other things. And you'll notice that this basil is intact, right? It's got roots on it. You'll see this sometimes in stores. This is called living basil. Unfortunately, you can't plant it again. I don't think you have really great results. You might try it and see what happens, but Annette, have you tried it? Yeah, it doesn't work so well. Yeah. It's been uprooted, literally, right? So it's not going to be planting very well, but it is going to keep pretty well with that storage method that I mentioned as far as the glass jar full of water in your fridge with a little plastic bag on it, okay? And basil is great, of course we know, with like pizza, tomato sauce, pasta, just in a salad. Some other more unusual ideas might be with eggs, like scrambled eggs, or in a frittata, okay? So if you haven't tried that, it's really good. It brings out a lot of flavor. If you're not used to the flavor of basil, it can have almost a cross between like a licorice and a mint flavor. And there are all different kinds of basil. All right, I can think of just 5 or 6 off the top of my head. I will tell you that chocolate basil does not taste like chocolate, but it's still really delicious. So if you're used to this kind of Italian basil, then I urge you to experiment with different. There's cinnamon basil, lemon basil, chocolate basil, all kinds of different. So look either at the grocery store or the next time you go to a specialty store or a farmer's market. There's going to be a lot of different varieties there. if you're trying to cut basil for your tomato sauce, and see if anyone was in my knife skills class. Okay, sweet, I won't be repeating myself. There is a really great way to cut larger leafed herbs, okay? And again, you're going to want to do this right before you use it, because anytime that you cut your herbs, you are damaging the cellular structure of the leaves, so you can encourage oxidation. And oxidation means that your herbs turn like dark brown or black. Okay, so again, you'd want to do this right before you start, right before you put it in your food. And once you've got your leaves sort of taken off of your stem, whether you've done that with your fingers or with your cute little scissors, you're going to stack the leaves, okay? And you can do this in however many leaves you're comfortable stacking together, all right? And then what you do is you're going to roll it up like a little burrito. Okay, so if you can see what I'm doing here. All right, you're just making a little tube. All right, and put that straight on your cutting board and just cut across that tube. See what I'm doing there? And what I'm doing is making a really nice garnish, okay? There are these little ribbons of basil. You can see them. And that technique is called chiffonade, all right? You can do this with any large leafed herb, basil, mint, some oregano. You can even do this with larger leafed vegetables like lettuce or Swiss chard if you want to sort of make it look fancier on the plate. Okay, so again, you just stack up your leaves and then roll them up and slice across. Okay. Some other larger leafed herbs that are easy to work with are going to be like chives or, I guess, dill to a certain extent. Okay, those don't take a lot of prep. Sometimes people get a little bit concerned with working with ones like rosemary or parsley or cilantro because they think it's a lot of work. Does anyone feel, yeah, Lori's like, yes, that would be me. Okay. So something that has this woody stem, okay, like rosemary, the stem doesn't taste great, okay? You can actually use the stem as sort of a skewer. Has anyone done this before? Once you strip rosemary leaves off of a rosemary stem, you can actually, if it's a pretty sturdy stem, you can use this as a skewer for grilling shrimp or chicken pieces on the grill, and it will actually impart some rosemary flavor to your protein, okay? But you don't really want to eat it because it's a stick, okay? So, no sticks. So what we want to do, okay, is hold the wooded herb in your non-dominant hand, all right, however that may be, and then take your dominant hand and strip the leaves off of the stick. Okay, so what you're left there, the naked stick, and a bunch of nice soft leaves that are easy to cut, okay? You would use this method too with another woody herb such as thyme or sage, those hardy herbs that we would dry upside down in our kitchen, okay? So once you have these herbs that are a little bit easier to handle, and if you have like some little sort of branches like this, you could just pinch those off, okay? And then you would be able to make a pile on your cutting board, and then you want to employ sort of a pivoting method with your knife, all right? So if you have the tip of your knife on your cutting board, okay, that's going to give you a lot of stability. And once you've got that pivot, then you fan it out, okay? So just remember, pivot and fan, okay? And keep your fingers out of the way. And you'll be able to just run your knife over these herbs until you have them chopped to the size that you're looking for. All right, so fresh rosemary is good on a lot of things. It's really great on roast chicken or pork. It's delicious on roasted potatoes or other vegetables as well, okay? And it smells really, really good. It's one of my favorite smells. So that's how you would deal with fresh rosemary. Any questions? All right. Parsley and cilantro, you would do the same thing. And it's pretty intuitive. Like I said, you can use the stems, but usually the leaves are what people want in their recipe. So you would just take the leaves off, okay? Make a little pile on your cutting board, and again, use that pivot and fan method. And again, this is going to give you a lot of control. You can really just decide how big you want each piece, okay? and this is something that you would add at the end of the cooking process. Cilantro, we know it's delicious with Mexican food. We also use it a lot in Thai food. It's used in some Middle Eastern foods as well. And the seed of cilantro is also used. Do y'all know what that one is? It's coriander, right, yeah. So sometimes you'll see cilantro referred to as coriander as well. So it can be a little bit confusing. For parsley, parsley is used in a lot of Italian food, of course. It's used as a garnish. It's used in Middle Eastern food. And there is a slight flavor difference between curly parsley and flat leaf parsley. So this is the flat leaf parsley. I prefer it. I think it has more flavor. Okay, it is going to be a little bit more expensive. But it's pretty, you can find it anywhere now. Okay, sometimes it's referred to as Italian parsley. All right, but it's really just a flat leaf parsley. Okay, use it the same way that you would curly parsley. Let's see, some other spices. Dill and mint, remember, those get overlooked sometimes. They have a lot of flavor. They're particularly good in summer salads or vegetable salads, as well as some certain soups. And as I said, you've got a ton of ideas on that handout, on that larger handout there, okay? Some other ideas that I've got here are in this recipe packet. So it's divided up into some ideas for making your own spice mixes. I mentioned that a good way to cut down on sugar and salt or heavily salted spice mixes are to make your own. So this is a good jumping off point for you. I've got a homemade taco seasoning mix, a homemade pumpkin spice mix. I know everyone loves pumpkin spice. Italian seasoning, and a homemade chai tea mix. So if anyone likes homemade chai, this would be a way to flavor your tea, and it would be good either in iced or hot ways. And the great thing about these sorts of recipes is you can make them in bulk and then use them as needed. And you all are going to do that today. You'll notice that you've got some little cups in front of you as well as some labeled bags. And so the ingredients that you have in front of you are for taco seasoning. And so you are welcome. They've all been pre-measured. We made it really easy for you, but you do have the recipe in front of you on these packets. So that's something that you're welcome to walk away with if you want to mix them in your bag. All you have to do is just put them in your bag, make sure you zip it up pretty well, and then just shake it. And the ingredients are actually on that sticker for you if you want to use it yourself or give it away to a friend. Okay. So that's definitely something to walk away with. Also in this packet, beyond the recipes, I've given you different flavor profiles. So if you are not really sure what you want to eat for dinner, but you know that you want it to taste Italian, okay, you'll be able to look on this little packet, go to Italian, which is somewhere toward the back, and you can be like, oh, okay, I can use basil, oregano, thyme, and parsley. I can add this to chicken, I can add this to pasta, I can add this to veggies, and I'm going to get that Italian flavor profile, okay? And on the back of each card, there's a note section for recipe ideas. So you would be able to just sort of jot down some ideas that come to you as you use these cards, okay? And we've got Greek, we've got Cajun, Caribbean, Thai, all sorts of different flavor profiles on here, okay? So I hope that you find these useful. There's a lot of information that you can find beyond this, of course, online, but this should be a really good way to get you all started. So we've got about 5 minutes left if you want to go on and make your little spice mixes. And let me know if you have any questions. Yeah?
Are you, when you say mint, are you referring to peppermint or spearmint?
We use it interchangeably, actually. They have slightly different flavors. Usually the mint that you see that grows really prolifically in gardens is going to be peppermint, but there is a Kentucky spearmint variety, and that's usually what they use in mint juleps, if that's your thing. Yeah.
Vanessa, what is galangal?
Galangal, okay.
Galangal?
Yeah, so that's Galangal, and that's used in a lot of Thai cooking. It sort of looks like dried out ginger, and it has a similar flavor to ginger, but it is a different plant. It's a little bit more lemony, if that makes sense, than ginger. It's usually sold in dried format. You'll find it if you're buying a pre-made spice mix, a Thai spice mix. It'll often be there in a sort of big, chunky format. You can find it in Asian groceries as well.
Do you ever see it fresh or is it just dry?
I've never seen it fresh. Maybe in other areas of this country or in other countries you might see it fresh, but I've only seen it dried. It's almost like a flavor a cross between ginger and lemongrass, if that makes sense. But it's really yummy, and it is something that you would want to chop pretty finely because it's quite woody. Any other questions about spices?
That's kind of an extension of that. Thinking about ginger, once you use a part of it, so the recipe doesn't use up the entire root that you bought at the store, what's the best way to
That's a great question.
preserve it until you use it?
Yeah, there's a really neat way to preserve ginger, actually. You can stick the whole thing in the freezer, okay? Wrap it up in either saran wrap or a Ziploc bag, put it in the freezer, and it will keep indefinitely. You can chop it up and freeze it in individual sort of amounts as well, if that's something that would be more convenient to you. Okay, so that would be another way. You do want to peel ginger, okay, because again, the skin's not going to hurt you, but it tastes a little bit tannic, a little bit like bitter, A really, really easy way to peel ginger, if you don't want to bust out the veggie peeler, is to use a spoon. So just use a regular teaspoon or tablespoon, scrape it along the root of the ginger, and it'll take the skin off without wasting too much of the ginger itself.
Does that work for turmeric as well?
It does work for turmeric, actually, yeah. So if anyone has seen fresh turmeric before, it looks a lot like ginger, except it's a beautiful, beautiful color. It's a really nice gold. And it's used in a lot of Asian cooking, a lot of Indian cooking, and people juice it as well. So if you did want to peel the turmeric, you would use that same method of dragging the spoon. Incidentally, turmeric also makes a really nice tea. If you wanted to use it, especially for these winter months, when you would be able to grate it and infuse either water or milk with it and then sweeten it to taste.
Are there dry spices or powders that you should store or not store in the freezer or refrigerator?
Honestly, I don't bother for that. My only danger with that is, even though a refrigerator tends to dry things out, it can also be a somewhat damp environment depending on your refrigerator, and it might encourage your spices to clump. Mm-hmm. And so that's why you generally keep them in the pantry. Yeah. But I mean, it's not going to harm it if you wanted to do that instead. Any other questions? All right, I want to do the prize drawing. So I need everyone's little, I think I'll put them in a Ziploc bag. Any other spices that y'all are curious about that have
Hey,
never been
Vanessa,
able to use?
I think there's a couple that came in that we didn't get yet.
Okay. Copy the bag.
Yeah, what about the garlic that you see that's stored in the jars of oil garlic? Pretty unheated, pretty easy to use.
It is, yeah. I mean, that's a perfectly fine option. So Annette's asking about the garlic that's already chopped and stored in jars. It is going to have usually a little bit of a preservative in it, okay? If you don't mind that, then go for it. Some of them are packed in oil, some of them are packed in some other like kind of watery liquid. And if it helps you to use more garlic in your cooking, then go for it. Yeah. You'll find ginger like that too. Any other names? All right, so the prize, I've already talked about the scissors, but you're also going to get this really great reference book on herbs and spices. So if you have any questions about anything that I was talking about today, this book will really answer it. There's a lot of info here, but there's also just really beautiful pictures. Okay, so it talks about how each herb or spice tastes, what parts you use, how to buy it and store it, and how to harvest it if you're going to grow it as well. Okay, so the lucky winner, Marcia Ballard. Hey. Congratulations.
What's the title of the book?
The title of the book is Herbs and Spices, The Cook's Reference. There you go. Congratulations. All right. Well, I think we're about at time. So if anyone has any further questions, please feel free to come up and talk to me. We've got lots of herbs here. If you just want to look at them or smell them or practice cutting them, then that's fine too. And I'm going to send out a survey So if you have any thoughts about this seminar, I'd love to hear them, okay? Thanks you all for coming.
Thank you.